Humiliated mid-flight just for flying economy. He stayed silent until the captain stepped in and the whole cabin fell silent. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. This story proves that quiet kindness can shake hearts louder than any outburst. Afternoon at the international airport was its usual chaos of noise and motion. People rushed by, announcements echoed across terminals, suitcase wheels rattled over tile, and the air was filled with a blend of coffee perfume and jet fuel. At Gate 17, passengers lined up to board a long-haul international flight. Among them was a man in a worn plaid shirt, a plain jacket and faded jeans, standing quietly with a backpack slung over one shoulder. No one noticed him, a completely ordinary figure in a sea of strangers. That man was Keanu Reeves. No bodyguards, no dark sunglasses, no entourage. He boarded the plane like anyone else and took a seat in economy class by the window near the middle of the cabin. While Keanu was placing his backpack in the overhead bin, a voice behind him rang out just loud enough to turn heads. "Oh, perfect. Emergency exit row. Legroom jackpot." A sharply dressed young man appeared in a fitted navy suit and polished Italian leather shoes, pulling a premium carry-on. He wore wireless earbuds, his face exuding confidence with a hint of arrogance. He glanced at Keanu settling into his seat, then frowned slightly, his gaze scanning Keanu's appearance like a full-body scan. "You're sitting here too?" he asked, his tone laced with subtle disbelief. Keanu nodded, offering a polite smile. "Yeah, this is my seat," the young man. Adam Tran, as his boarding pass would reveal, sat down beside him, removing his earbuds. He didn't offer a greeting. Instead, he gave Keanu another quick look, then smirked. "I guess you fly a lot too, huh? Though I imagine you usually don't go for economy." Keanu turned calm as ever. "I find it comfortable enough." Adam chuckled under his breath. "You live simple, I'll give you that. I can't. I work in tech, startup. World time is money. I usually fly business class, but today's flight was overbooked." He leaned out slightly to look toward the first class section ahead. "I hate being pushed out of where I belong. You know that feeling?" Keanu stared ahead, still composed. Sometimes Adam laughed as if he'd just won some invisible debate. "So what do you do? Travel industry, logistics? You look like someone with life experience, but not exactly a CEO type." Keanu smiled. "I work in entertainment." Adam nodded knowingly, like editing, camera work, indie production stuff. Keanu didn't correct him. He just nodded. Beneath the warm yellow lights of the airplane cabin, the two men sat side by side. One talked without pause, the other simply listened, and already something quiet but profound was beginning to unfold. An entire judgment had been made, without anyone really knowing anything. The plane slowly pulled away from the gate, engines humming softly throughout the cabin. Passengers settled into their seats, buckling belts, while flight attendants moved through for final checks. But in row 22 of economy class, a conversation was starting to feel increasingly lopsided. Adam leaned back into his seat, turning toward Keanu with an air of relaxed dominance. "You know, I once pitched a startup for 15 minutes and got $1 million in funding. Part luck, sure, but mostly timing and how you say things." Keanu gave a polite nod, showing neither surprise nor awe. Adam seemed a bit frustrated by the lack of reaction. He pressed on. "My company's in AI. We've got some serious traction. I've been invited to speak at TEDx soon. They said I've got the kind of mind that could disrupt the industry." "Pretty cool, right?" Keanu kept a faint, unreadable smile. "Congratulations. Sounds like you're on a good path." Adam nodded confidently, arms now crossed, glancing around the cabin as if surveying a boardroom. "Yeah. I mean, real success isn't that hard. Once you get the formula, you just have to build your personal brand. Make people think there's something about you worth admiring. You get what I mean?" Keanu looked at him a moment longer. His gaze wasn't mocking or dismissive, it was just steady. I think if people truly admire you, you don't need to make them think it. Adam let out a short laugh now with a slight smirk. Spoken like someone who avoids the spotlight. I'm guessing you're the kind of guy who prefers staying behind the scenes, huh? Keanu tilted his head slightly. Something like that. Adam clicked his tongue, turning to face forward again, lowering his voice just enough to still be heard. Some people talk about simplicity like it's noble. But really, it's just all they can manage. A woman sitting in the row ahead turned subtly, clearly having caught that line. Across the aisle, a young boy looked over at Keanu with a curious expression, his eyes widening slightly as if recognizing something. But no one said anything. Keanu didn't flinch, no sigh, no frown. He simply turned his face toward the window. Outside, clouds drifted peacefully by, while inside, a man in economy class continued speaking to the world like he belonged on its highest floor. The flight had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers started pulling out books, adjusting their screens, and requesting drinks. Adam opened his laptop, then turned back to Keanu like he wasn't quite done talking. "Don't you feel like you're missing something?" he asked. We're in economy. Business class is just a few steps away, but it's a whole other world." Keanu looked at the screen in front of him, but didn't press play. He simply shook his head. "I think sometimes you learn more sitting in the right place." Adam frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sitting closer to people, hearing how they live, talk, react. There's no distance there." Adam laughed, confident, dismissive. "See, I like distance. If you're successful and you don't create space between yourself and others, then maybe you're not successful enough." Across the aisle, a young woman, maybe in her 20s, turned to look at Keanu again. This time, something in her face lit up. She quickly opened the gallery on her phone, swiped through a few pictures, then glanced back at Keanu. She leaned over to the person next to her and whispered, "Is that him?" The person leaned closer to get a better look. Their eyes slowly widened. Suddenly, from the back of the cabin, a flight attendant approached. She held a small envelope in one hand and wore a polite but unmistakably excited smile. She stopped right at Keanu's row. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a respectful tone. "The captain asked me to deliver this. He would like to invite you to the cockpit when you're free. He's a huge fan." The mood in the cabin shifted in an instant. What had been casual and relaxed now felt heavy. Eyes turned, conversations paused. Even the air seemed still. Adam snapped his head toward Keanu, visibly stunned. "The captain?" he stammered. Keanu gave the flight attendant a soft smile. "Tell him I'd be happy to. I'll come by after I finish my drink." She nodded, and there was something unmistakably respectful in her eyes. Adam stared at Keanu, speechless. The man who had been the most self-assured person on the flight suddenly had nothing left to say. The atmosphere in the economy cabin had shifted, quiet yet electric. Though the plane glided smoothly through the clouds, a new kind of turbulence was spreading silently. Whispers. "Is that really Keanu Reeves? No way. Look at his eyes. It's him." The young woman who had spotted him earlier now searched his name on her phone. Dozens of images popped up: Keanu at premieres, signing autographs on set in action films. The bone structure, the calm gaze, unmistakable. Adam sat motionless, his eyes locked onto Keanu, as if trying to recalculate everything that had just happened. His expression was blank, confused, and slightly afraid. An older man across the aisle slowly turned around, stared for a long moment, and gave a slight nod, like confirming a long-held suspicion. The man in seat 22A wasn't just another quiet traveler. A young boy in row 24 suddenly asked aloud, "Mom, is that John Wick?" His mother chuckled awkwardly, then looked over, and this time her smile faded into silent recognition. The flight attendant returned now, holding a chilled bottle of water and a note in her other hand. She leaned toward Keanu with a warm smile and said, "The captain says he's watched The Matrix at least 10 times, and this plane internally among the crew, we jokingly call it the Neo." A passenger near the rear galley overheard and muttered, "I kept thinking he looked familiar. Didn't expect it to be actually him." Adam hadn't said a word. His shoulders had slumped slightly, and he blinked repeatedly, like trying to piece together broken logic. The confidence he wore earlier now drifted off him like vapor. Keanu's demeanor hadn't changed. He accepted the water, nodded politely, and took a small sip, calm as ever. But everyone in the cabin now knew this wasn't just a regular guy, and this moment wasn't just another flight. Adam no longer leaned back in his seat like before. He sat upright now, hands clasped in front of him, eyes avoiding Keanu like he was avoiding a mirror. No one around was speaking to him, not out of cruelty, but because it wasn't necessary. The cabin wasn't noisy, but it was full of quiet awareness. A different flight attendant walked by, paused for a second to glance at Keanu, and offered a respectful nod. Silent recognition in her eyes. An elderly man returning from the restroom gently patted Keanu's shoulder as he passed, saying nothing, yet delivering more warmth than any compliment could. Keanu remained where he was, back against the seat, eyes turned toward the window. There was no forced composure, no performative celebrity aura. He didn't need to prove anything, and somehow that made everyone around him respect him even more. Adam swallowed hard. He turned toward Keanu, forcing a smile. "You know, I may have, talked a bit too much earlier." Keanu looked at him and nodded slightly. "I understand." Adam continued, trying to explain himself. "I didn't mean to offend you. I just thought you were like a regular guy." Keanu smiled gently. "Thanks. I take that as a compliment." The words were soft like a breeze, but they made Adam falter. He scratched his head and added quietly, "You handled everything so calmly. If it were me, I probably would have snapped." Keanu tilted his head slightly. Reactions are choices. Sometimes not reacting lets people see themselves more clearly. Adam fell silent. His eyes dropped to the floor. Maybe for the first time in a long while, he was truly listening. Not to reply, but to understand. No one needed to embarrass him. Keanu didn't need to lecture. But it was precisely that absence of judgment that made Adam feel ashamed of himself. Further back, a few passengers had started to stretch or move about. But the middle cabin remained unusually still, as if everyone was sharing in a quiet collective reflection. And at the center of it all, Keanu sat calmly silent, but somehow teaching the entire plane how to see people differently. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the arrival of another flight attendant, this time the lead. She appeared to be in her 50s, composed and confident, carrying a sleek badge with the airline's logo and the silver inscription, "Guest of Honor." She stopped at row 22, bent slightly at the waist, and spoke with a warm, dignified tone. "Mr. Reeves, the captain, would like to invite you to the cockpit now, if you're ready. We have a small gift and a very big thank you." Keanu nodded gently. "I'd be happy to." Adam still shrunk into his seat, didn't lift his eyes. Around them, however, every passenger was now watching Keanu, not with shock, but with quiet admiration. Not because of his fame, but because of the quiet power he carried in how he handled everything. A young boy nearby turned to his mother and whispered, "Mom, why does everyone respect that guy so much?" His mother smiled, because some people earn respect just by how they live. When Keanu stood, no one clapped, but every pair of eyes followed him. He needed no introduction, no explanation, no name tag. Near the cockpit door, a young flight attendant whispered to her colleague, "He's the one who donated $1 million to the pilot scholarship fund after that crash last year." No one knew, until the captain saw his name on today's passenger list. The other attendant's face changed, and he's sitting in economy. The cockpit door opened. A tall captain in a crisp uniform stepped out, smiling warmly. "Keanu, it's an honor. I never thought I'd meet you outside a movie screen, especially not on the plane. We've all nicknamed the Neo." Keanu smiled back and shook his hand firmly. There were no spotlights, no cameras, no music, just real people, real moments, and one simple truth shining quietly in a crowded cabin. True kindness doesn't need to be recorded to be priceless. As the cockpit door quietly closed behind Keanu, the cabin fell into a deeper kind of silence. Not because the crew had asked for it, but because no one wanted to disturb what had just been revealed. Adam remained still. He hadn't opened his laptop again. Even his smartwatch, the one that usually lit up every 5 minutes with notifications, had gone dark. He had silenced it without realizing. Across the aisle, the young woman who had once thought to take a photo lifted her phone again, only to lock the screen and place it face down. Some moments she now understood weren't meant for social media. A middle-aged man removed his earbuds, tucked them into his shirt pocket, and stared ahead. Not watching anything, not listening. Maybe replaying a memory. Maybe thinking about a time he had treated someone as less valuable. Behind them, the young flight attendant from earlier quietly pulled out her phone and reopened an old article about a pilot scholarship fund. Near the bottom, a single line stood out. "Anonymous donor. Contribution $1,000. She set her phone down on the tray table and stared at nothing in particular. The cabin wasn't silent, but every sound was somehow softer, as if everyone had begun listening to something else. The sound of their own thoughts. Adam took a slow, deep breath, perhaps the first real breath he'd taken all flight. The arrogance, the swagger, it was gone. In its place was the expression of someone who had just realized he wasn't as great as he believed. And somewhere in that cabin, something quiet was unfolding. One by one, people were confronting themselves. There were no moral speeches, no announcements. No one told anyone what to feel. But clearly this flight wasn't the same as when it took off. When Keanu returned to his seat, the cabin fell into silence once again. But this time it was the silence of respect. No applause, no chatter. Just an atmosphere calm enough for people to hear their own thoughts. As he quietly sat back down, Adam looked up at him. There was no smugness in his eyes now. No judgment, just someone perhaps for the first time genuinely trying to understand rather than assume. He inhaled slowly, exhaled carefully, then spoke softly, just loud enough for the two of them. "I'm sorry." Keanu looked at him, not coldly, not sternly, just with a calm, open acceptance. "It's okay," he replied. Adam hesitated, then added, voice a little shaky, "I used to think I was doing well because I could do so many things. But I never considered that real strength might be knowing when to stay quiet." Keanu nodded gently. "Some things you only learn by living through them. You're not wrong for not knowing until now." Adam looked forward for a moment, then let out a small laugh. Not a smug one, but the kind that comes when you finally step outside your ego. It's strange. A guy like me, learning humility from someone like you? Keanu replied, voice low and steady, like he was speaking to an old friend. "I was like you once. Spoke too fast, listened too slow." Adam didn't say anything for a while. Then finally he said, "Thank you." for not making me feel small. You could have, but you didn't." Keanu didn't respond with words, but his look, steady kind, was answer enough. There were no wise speeches, no lectures, just the quiet grace of someone who didn't need to prove they were above anyone, and in doing so help the other person finally see themselves clearly. And for Adam, in all his startup pitches and keynote speeches and rooms filled with applause, this was the first time he truly began to understand what real maturity might look like. From that moment on, no one tried to draw attention anymore. No loud conversations, no unnecessary orders to feel important. No one walked through the aisle like it was a runway. The flight continued as usual. But everything had changed. Keanu remained still in his seat. He didn't speak. He didn't watch a movie. He just stared out the window, sometimes closing his eyes, lost in thoughts that felt deeply personal, deeply human. Adam now, quiet, pulled a small notebook from his backpack. Not a laptop, not a tablet, but an actual paper notebook. He wrote something. Not much, not rushed, just a few lines, then closed it. He leaned back for the first time in hours, not out of exhaustion, but as if he had finally released something inside. Around the cabin, some passengers turned on their screens, but only to view the flight map or soft images. No one played action film. A middle-aged woman switched to the meditation mode, hands loosely resting together as if giving quiet thanks for the life she was living. No one told them to change, but clearly someone made them want to. A small boy stared at Keanu for a few minutes before whispering to his mother, "Mom, he doesn't look like a famous person." The mother gently stroked his hair and replied, "That's exactly why he's special." The plane's engine hummed steadily in the background, but inside the minds of those on board, another sound echoed a subtle awakening. It wasn't loud, it didn't last long. But if you heard it, you wouldn't be the same again. And somewhere above the clouds, in a metal capsule soaring through the sky, something extraordinary was unfolding. No one was trying to stand out, but everyone was becoming a better version of themselves. 3 days after the flight, a blog post written by one of the passengers, the young woman who had been sitting across from Keanu, began to go viral. The title was simple: "I sat 3 meters from Keanu Reeves and learned more than my entire MBA." In the post, she didn't write to catch a trend. She wrote because some things just can't be kept to yourself. He didn't talk much, never introduced himself, never pulled out his phone, never said what he did. But the way he carried himself, the way he didn't react when disrespected, and the way he made others reflect on themselves, it made me realize some lessons arrive through silence. The story spread fast across social media. Not because it was about Keanu Reeves, but because everyone had at some point been Adam judging someone by their appearance, staying quiet while it happened. One major news outlet ran the headline, "Not a role, not a film. This might be the realest thing Keanu Reeves has ever done." A member of the airline staff also reshared the story, adding, "We've served hundreds of celebrities, but no one ever chose economy and refused special treatment like Keanu Reeves did that day." Most striking of all was that the post was later reshared by Adam himself. This time he added just one line: "Not to sell anything, not to promote himself. I was the guy sitting next to him, and I was the luckiest person on that flight. Not because of my seat, but because I got to witness a man worth learning from." Keanu said nothing. He gave no interviews. He didn't recreate the moment with the airline. He disappeared, as he often does, letting the story stay in the light, not his name, and somehow, that's what made people want to keep telling it. Within just a week, the story was being retold thousands of times, on podcasts and reaction videos, even inside soft skills classes at prestigious universities. One professor wrote, "We've taught students how to pitch, how to impress, how to build a personal brand." maybe it's time we start teaching them how to sit still at the right moment. A journalist commented, "The Keanu story doesn't shock you. It quiets you, and that's why it matters more than most viral headlines ever have." Online communities began referring to it as the Keanu effect, when kindness doesn't need to win, but still makes the world stop. People started sharing stories of their own times. They had judged someone by appearance. One user posted a photo of themselves from 10 years ago and wrote, "I used to be Adam, and I hope I'm not anymore." No one had to point fingers. No one had to decide who was right or wrong, because this story didn't divide it, reflect it. A Japanese newspaper published an editorial that read, "Silent, polite, and unshakable. Those are the strongest weapons in a noisy world." And Keanu used them without ever lifting them. The story reached a high school classroom. A student in 11th grade shared, "If I sat next to him, I don't think I'd say a word. But I know I'd never forget the way he looked at people." What was most striking was that the words now being shared weren't coming from influencers or publicists or social media strategists. They came from ordinary people, quiet people, people who don't usually post anything. And strangely enough, the person being talked about the most still hadn't said a word. The plane landed on time. As it came to a stop, cabin lights flicked on, and the familiar clicks of seatbelts echoed throughout the cabin. But unlike most flights where people immediately stood, shuffled, checked their phones, this time everyone stayed seated for a few extra seconds. No one said it out loud, but they all knew this was a moment not to rush through. Keanu stood up, slung his backpack over his shoulder like any ordinary traveler. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no crowd of fans. Just a few nods, a few thankful glances, and a strange silence. Not awkward, but full of respect. A young boy nearby whispered to his mother, "He's like a superhero." But without the costume. His mother nodded, because real kindness doesn't need a cape. Adam remained seated, letting Keanu walk ahead. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't ask for a selfie. But as Keanu passed by, Adam quietly said, "I'll remember the way you made me want to be better. Not with your words, just by being you." Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder, said nothing, and kept walking. Simple, just like everything about him. As he disappeared into the aisle, one passenger murmured aloud, almost to herself, "We'll probably never see him again. But I hope we don't forget what it felt like when he was here." In a world where everyone fights to be seen, he was the one who chose to step quietly in a society obsessed with winning. He was the one who never needed to prove anything. And on a flight that seemed just like any other, he made dozens of people want to become the better version of themselves. Not with power, not with fame, but simply by knowing exactly when to say nothing.